Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Today, we're going to be going through the film industry. Now, for those of you who have been Netflixing and chilling or going on Amazon or going on Hulu, many of you might be wondering, the film industry is kind of an antiquated system. People really don't go to the theaters anymore. Well, last year was kind of a hodgepodge of good news and bad news in that regard. For one thing, more African Americans and more Asian Americans were actually at the movie theaters. This was for the first time in a very long time that we saw upticks in movie theater audience. However, the summer 2007 box office was not good to the movie industry. And so some executives have thought about perhaps changing the model around. Perhaps allowing people to watch movies the same day they come out in movie theaters on tablets, smartphones, television sets, and other mediums that we have access to. So in this lecture, we're going to be addressing kind of where the film industry started, where it is now, and then where it's going. So let's begin. Let's look at the first slide. The moving picture and capital of motion pictures in New York City. So the man who seems incredibly enthused in the photo is none other than Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison, one of his first motion pictures was Black Maria, and he had his motion picture studio in West Orange, New Jersey. And so Kaufman Astoria Film Studio, another studio in New York City at the time, was built in Queens. Edison Studios were also in Chelsea, Manhattan. And so in the early 20th century, thanks in part to Thomas Edison, New York City is a thriving film industry. However, things quickly change. Let's go to the next slide. As we can see, people were running from snow to palm trees. What does this mean? A lot of people who were filmmakers at this time actually had to pay a licensing fee to Thomas Edison for his inventions that captured the moving image. And so one brave director, D.W. Griffith, went out to LA and started filming in 1910. More movie makers start hearing of this and start hearing about Los Angeles, that it's a place in which you can film year-round, the weather's quite nice, and you can circumvent Edison's fees for using his technology. Well, sure enough, more and more aspiring film directors start moving to Los Angeles and start testing this out. Again, if we think about what's going on in this period, you can't really pursue people for using your technology if they're miles and miles apart from you. There's no internet, there's no record of these people using the equipment to do so, and so it becomes really, really difficult for Thomas Edison to track down these people who are exploiting his technology and capitalizing off of it. Let's go to the next slide. Of course, any conversation surrounding the film industry cannot be stated without discussing Jewish immigrants. Now, I know that there are a lot of comments about the Hollywood industry that is in fact dominated by Jewish people. Well, that's in part because it really was started by Jewish immigrants. And so the film industry was born in part and molded by many, many Jewish immigrants. And I have a few listed here. Adolf Zucker of Paramount Pictures, he was from Austria-Hungary. Louis B. Mayer, another Jew. Sam Goldwyn, Paramount Goldwyn, from Poland. William Fox, Fox Films from Hungary. And Carl Laemmle, Universal Studios, hailing from Germany. And what wound up happening at this time is that a lot of Jewish immigrants came to the United States hungry for opportunity. The problem was nobody wanted to open their doors to them. And so they came across the Nickelodeon. That is not necessarily the cable channel, but it is a 5-cent brief moving image picture. And so people would pay a nickel to learn a little bit about a documentary on something, or it could have been a still moving image of somebody twirling as a ballerina, or it could have been a 5 or 1 minute still of somebody walking around and then tripping on a banana. So these Nickelodeons, even though they were kind of crude in their image and crude in their quality, were still consumed by quite a number of people. However, the movie industry picks up momentum. Although film does start as silent film at this time, 1927, we do have the jazz singer most famously starring Al Jolson. And that was put out by Warner Brothers. That is the first instance in which we have a film that uses sound. And then, of course, in 1928, our very own Mickey Mouse makes his appearance. We're starting to learn a new behavior in this. Let's go to the movies. Remember, people don't have TV at this point. And so going out of your house to see something was very, very new for a lot of people. And it was a learned behavior. Going to the news, going to see something visual about the news was very different. At this point, people only had radio and newspapers. Let's go to the next slide. Of course, given the popularity of the movie industry and going to the movies, the golden age of Hollywood was created here. And so, golden age of Hollywood was very much like a factory of sorts. First, actors were actually under contract with one studio for most of their careers. That goes for some of the people that we're looking at here. Most notably, Humphrey Bogart with Audrey Hepburn next to him in the photo. They were largely under contract for, say, a Warner Brothers or a Universal for much of their career. There wasn't a lot of power on the behalf of the creatives to negotiate with studios. Studios, in fact, ran everything. What does that mean? It means that the studios were vertically integrated. That means they owned everything from sets, they owned everything from directors, actors, writers, producers, marketing, PR, and even the movie chains that would house and exhibit the movies. And so this process really helped movie studios consolidate power in a manner that was very constricting for a lot of creatives. Let's go to the next slide. However, World War II comes about, and so that begins the undoing of the Hollywood system. Pro-US films were made in rapid succession. We even had a lot of notable Hollywood actors and actresses participating in World War II. Some were visiting troops, some actually fought and served in World War II. The pro-US films were propaganda, but they were used to recruit soldiers and boost morale of troops as well as citizens. World War II was a very, very gloomy period in this country's history. Now, what winds up happening is that the Hollywood studios have consolidated power. In fact, you could argue that the market was very much an oligopoly of sorts. You really only had 5 or 6 studios that were dominant. There really wasn't a lot of room for new entrants into the marketplace. One practice that caught the attention of the Department of Justice was block booking. Now, block booking means that if you wanted an A-list movie, let's say that was starring a Humphrey Bogart, you would also have to buy 5 or 6 other movies in a bundle. And you didn't always know who was acting in these movies. You didn't always know if these movies were high quality. So sure, you might have a movie with Marilyn Monroe, but you might also have 5 other movies that really weren't very, very good. And so movie theater exhibitors had to deal with blind bidding. They were bidding on packages of movies that they weren't quite sure were going to be very, very good. 1940, Department of Justice accuses movie studios of illegal monopolistic practices. 1948, we have the dissolution of the entire Hollywood system. Creatives now have an unprecedented amount of power to negotiate contracts. Studios could no longer have theaters purchase hundreds of movies. Remember the block booking. Newly employed actors, writers, and directors turn to television. Now, television at this point is a brand new medium. In truth, it had been around since the late 20s, but given the Depression and given our entrance into World War II, a lot of people weren't buying television sets. In fact, the 1950s brought along a very leisurely period in which people were exploring what it meant to have disposable income and the ability to enjoy leisure. And so people began purchasing television sets. Now, at first, only the wealthy were purchasing TV sets, much like only the wealthy were purchasing hybrid cars at first. And so, as more and more people begin purchasing television sets, the television industry itself grows. And so, more and more creatives are going to television, which is a new medium full of great opportunities. As you can imagine with the movie industry, a lot of movie executives are freaking out. They don't know what's coming down the pike. You mean that people can stay home and watch something that looks like a movie, feels like a movie, has a miniature movie screen on it? What does this mean for our business? Well, at first, the television industry and the movie industry didn't necessarily like each other. This does change, though, as we go from the 50s into the 60s. Let's look at the next slide. We have James Dean, Rebel Without a Cause, and so TV and film industries, as stated before, are considered rivals, but then the film and TV industries realize that there's a new visual advertising technique that both can capitalize on, and that, of course, is the movie trailer. Movie trailers can, in fact, be exhibited on television. This is a new way for television channels to earn revenue from commercials, right? The movie industry uses these movie trailers and pays TV channels for the opportunity to showcase a particular trailer to consumers. We also have revolutionary TV going on here. Even though TV is in its nascent stage, we still have a divergence from what we're normally accustomed to viewing. Remember, in the 30s and 40s, if you think of Gone with the Wind, or if you think of The Wizard of Oz, a lot of people were very much interested in fantastical kind of shows. Shows that really delved into science fiction or delved into fantastical worlds. In the 1950s, 1960s, people are looking for real depictions of reality. This goes into looking at society, perhaps the fissures between cultures, the fissures between races, coming of age stories, but also exploring what does it mean to be a teenager in 1950s America. And so a lot of this feeds into the wave into the 60s and 70s. In the 60s and 70s, we have a lot of counterculture films and a lot of exploration into sexuality, violence, and gratuitous violence at that. And so people are constantly pushing the boundaries of movies. We're also exploring international distribution. For the first time ever, a lot of movie studios are realizing that there might be other markets untapped abroad. Might there be a country, perhaps Sweden, Italy, Germany, that might appreciate a particular movie from the United States during this period? More and more movies are being shipped abroad. Some countries balk at this and say, this is kind of pushing westernization. Westernization, of course, being this process in which westernized cultural ideas are pushed into other countries. And so Asian countries are a little bit suspect surrounding taking in more and more US-based movies at this point. As we go into the 70s and into the 1980s, we see, and this is a picture, of course, of E.T., we see blockbusters coming out for the first time. Now, many of you, those of you who might be a little bit older, might remember Blockbuster, the video store. Well, what that means is that a blockbuster is meant to be a tentpole film. What does that even mean? A tentpole film suggests that it's a film that is meant to appeal to the widest possible audience possible and has a big budget. Cannot emphasize this enough. It was absolutely unheard of to spend a ton of money on movies. It had really only been done several times, and so many movie studios were circumspect in investing this amount of money, tens and tens of millions of dollars, into a movie and getting a return, and investing in graphics, and investing in big budget screen designs and visualizations and aesthetics that would appeal to consumers. And so what we have here is that more and more Hollywood executives are investing in this. Additionally, what we have during this time is the first major nostalgic boom in the film industry. Now, if you are 10 years old in 1955, that means that you're 40 years old come 1985. Well, Hollywood movie executives realize this. And so there's a big nostalgic boom in the 1980s in which movies are crafted to both appeal to teenagers and children, but also adults. Let's face it. If a movie like E.T. can appeal to parents and appeal to children, then instead of just getting the teens or just getting the children, you could have 2-3 people per family viewing the movie. And so it worked out quite nicely for that decade. Even now in the 2010s, we're kind of seeing a resurgence of nostalgia for the 80s, just as people were seeing a nostalgic boom for the 50s in the 1980s. It goes without saying, too, that it helped that Ronald Reagan was president during this time, because he also instilled upon this country a real palpable sense of conservatism and really going back to what America once was in the 1950s. However, in the 1980s, it isn't all sunshine and rainbows. There are new threats, once again, to the Hollywood industry. Cable comes out on television, and Hollywood was pretty okay at this point with having 5 channels on television. However, going from 5 channels to 30 to 60 to even 100 channels frightened a lot of Hollywood executives, really not knowing what it was going to do for their business model. Of course, their fears were placated once they realized that they could put movies on cable television and either have people rent them or purchase them or view them. So it still served as another type of revenue for that matter. And so the Hollywood industry is not only grappling with that, but also VCRs, the video cassette recorders, those black antiquated boxes that might be in your attic somewhere. Hollywood studios were really afraid of people pirating content, of course, until they realized that they could use this as an ancillary revenue stream, namely creating video cassettes and having people purchase video cassettes of movies that they loved. As we go further into the 1990s, into the 2000s, we see that a lot of indie Hollywood labels come out, most notably Miramax. Now granted, as of the airing of this program, Harvey Weinstein has been dragged through the mud in Hollywood, and he has been lambasted for being a misogynist. But his company, Miramax Films, which produced, among other things, Good Will Hunting, was a major indie studio label. A lot of Hollywood studios realized that indie films could really help them in marketing certain film titles, if you will. For instance, Good Will Hunting was produced by Miramax, who was owned by Disney at the time. And while Good Will Hunting isn't necessarily the most violent movie, there are adult situations in the movie, probably not something that Disney wanted to be affiliated with. So it helps them to have a sub-indie studio to channel through that kind of movie and market it under the Miramax name. And so studios are also investing less in development at this time as vertical integration kind of comes back. There's a lot of consolidation of media firms at this time. Media firms are being bought up. Disney is buying up ABC, and a lot of other media and entertainment companies are following suit. We have a new development in the 1990s into the 2000s. Wall Street is interested in investing in the movie industry. Now, this is a little goofy because Wall Street typically looks for a return on their investments. After all, that's what stockbrokers do. The problem is that most movies don't return a profit. In fact, up to 80% of films each year lose revenue. And the only real way that Hollywood studios can make back that revenue is by having big tentpole films. Your Jurassic Parks, your Fast and the Furiouses, Indiana Jones, Transformers, those franchises that are guaranteed to make back revenue. So as we go into the 2000s, into the 2010s, hedge funds are starting to also invest in movies. So hedge funds are firms that typically take on really risky investments, hoping for a major windfall in terms of revenue return to them. However, the recession comes and kind of cuts out a lot of the small labels, and a lot of Wall Street executives pull out of investing in films. It just cannot be done. Not only are movies usually not having any kind of return on investment, but the recession really wipes out a lot of the interest in investing in movies. Movie tickets are still purchased in the mid-2000s, despite less lending and more difficulty to borrow money from banks for Hollywood studios. Franchises have staying power, and actors are less relevant now. This has kind of been the lasting trend from this into the present day. And so the Hollywood industry has really gone through quite an evolution. It really went from having the studios having a lot of power to creatives having a lot of power. And now with the advent of SVOD systems, namely subscription video on demand services, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Crackle, a lot of Hollywood executives still don't really know what the future holds. In the last few years, something called MoviePass has also been introduced into the marketplace. In fact, MoviePass has been stated as a way in which for Hollywood executives to start learning about who goes to the movie theater. Now you might wonder about that and say, well, I purchase a ticket, I swipe my credit card, I get popcorn. There are plenty of purchasing opportunities for the Hollywood system to learn who I am, for the concession stand people to learn who I am, for the movie theater industry to learn who I am. But the fact is that much of your credit card information is, one, protected, and two, isn't really able to be divulged to other companies. And so the movie theater industry, for much of its existence, has been at a loss for learning who its consumers are. MoviePass has come along as a way in which to serve as a loyalty card for some, and it also tracks your information. So to sign up for a MoviePass, you have to at least give them who you are, your gender, ethnicity, race, location, and every time you swipe to go see a movie in a movie theater, it tracks it. The CEO of MoviePass is hoping to sell this data to movie theaters and to even content studio producers in an effort to understand who is still coming to the movies. And is there a way in which we can start getting people back into the movie theater for that matter? Let's look at the next slide. From film to script, it really isn't enough to talk about how do we get to a film without really talking about the process in which a film is made. And so first, a script has to be made. Now, a script can be made by anybody, but the crux of this is whether or not the writer can get the script in the hands of an agent, and hopefully a good one at that. What the agent will do is try to shop the script around to producers. Now, there is something called a holding contract. It's kind of a method for attaching talent and equity to the particular script. So for instance, let's say that I've written a script, and let's say that the title might be My Eyes Are in the Clouds. And so if the script entitled My Eyes Are in the Clouds are being shipped around, some producers might look at it and say, well, the guy who wrote the script is kind of green. He may not know what he's doing. Is there any other talent attached to the script? And so what might wind up happening is that I might say to my agent, can we attach talent to the script to get people excited about it? And so what might wind up happening is a holding contract may be put in place. Now, what I might want is for Will Smith to star in the particular movie. Okay, so I want Will Smith attached to my script. How do I do it? What I can offer Will Smith is a holding contract. Will, I know Will. Will, I'd like you to be in my movie, but I think that the window we're going to shoot in is going to be 1.5 years from now. So can you not work between January 2019 and September 2019? If you cannot work for that period, what I can do is I can pay you. And believe it or not, that's the use of holding contracts. You're essentially holding talent in place, hoping that you can shoot during that window. Does the talent still get paid if you can't make the movie? They do. And holding contracts can be very, very lucrative for a lot of actors and actresses who, as per the agreement, don't work during that period, hoping that the movie that they've signed on for will in fact be made. Let's go to the next slide. With going from a script to a film, one of the key elements here is a producer shopping the script itself or the film spec itself to studios. So if a studio likes the project, it'll ask the producer to attach more actors, writers, producers, and make a full script out of it. Finally, if the assembled package is approved by the studio, it will likely be greenlit. And that is kind of a phrase that is used in Hollywood. The studio has often found investment partners at this point, but it may still find more on the film during its production, especially if it's over budget. It is not uncommon to pull in other partners, other distributors who might be interested in the film during film production to finance it, because ultimately they may have an opportunity to distribute the film. So for instance, if I am making a picture for Disney and I have the money, I have the finance, and it is budgeted at $30 million, but we go over $35 million, we have a problem. And so there's a gap of at least $5 million that has been spent and needs to be covered. What might happen is Disney might turn to a Fox or to another film studio distributor and say, listen, we're a little light on cash right now. We're trying to make this film. What we can do is we can sell you the rights to distribute the movie in Europe. And in return, you can give us the funding that we need to complete the movie. This is done fairly regularly in the movie industry. Let's go to the next slide. And so once the finished product has been exhibited to studio executives for approval, notes will be given. If the notes are brief in nature and can be turned around fairly quickly, then the process is pretty straightforward. If reshoots need to be done, if certain actors need to be replaced, as you can imagine, things will be terribly, terribly delayed. Once the film is completed, marketing and release date are discussed. And box office is very, very deceiving here, and this will be the last point that I make. With the box office, one of the oddest things about it is that a lot of people seem to draw hype from it. Oh, this movie made $100 million during its first opening box office weekend. That's huge. That must mean that it's good. Not really. In fact, if we really think about it, all the box office tells us is what a great marketing job the film studio did on the movie. There's really no way to tell, at least during the first week, how good or how bad a movie is. Really, Hollywood executives try to pay to the second to sixth week during which the movie is exhibited in movie theaters. And so the next time you see how well a movie did during the opening box office weekend, bear in mind that it's probably a greater indicator of the marketing that was put behind it, be it trailers, online advertisements, press releases, public relations, and other things that marketing and PR executives attached to the movie did to celebrate and raise the exposure of the movie. Well, that's all the time that we have today. Thank you so much for joining us here on Late Night Learning. Keep laughing and keep learning.